Okay, this is going to be a brief overview of Archipelago. Archipelago is a multi-game, multi-world randomizer mod that lets you play lots of classic, retro, and current games together in a single large randomized pool. I'm not going to elaborate too much more on what Archipelago is. I'm assuming you've come here already knowing that. What I am going to elaborate on is how to install it, how to work with the official Archipelago games, and how to work with the unofficial, unfinished Archipelago games as well. So, let's start with what Archipelago itself is and how it works. Principally how it works. We're going to start there. So, obviously, you have a game or an emulator that is playing your game. It has to communicate with the Archipelago server instance, be that the one that runs on Archipelago's website or one that you're hosting yourself. That is done one of several different ways within the game. So within the game, it might natively support netcode and can connect to Archipelago directly. That is a possibility. It might have a memory patch or a mod. A lot of Unity games and others have mods which allow for netcode to run. And it could also patch the ROM in order to enable randomization. This is especially true of console games that were never designed to run randomized with netcode. Once a game has been configured to run that netcode, it uses that to communicate with an Archipelago client. The Archipelago client is actually what does the communication with the Archipelago server. This clients run on your workstation and then communicate to the Archipelago server wherever that resides. Again, this could be Archipelago's website, or it could be a server instance that you are hosting locally. For example, if you are running this on Archipelago's website, it would have a server address of archipelago.gg : the port number. So, Archipelago. As far as most people are concerned who are running Archipelago, it consists of a folder on your desktop that has all of these files. But I can hear you already saying, how do I even get this far? So let's talk about how to install Archipelago in the first place. If you go to archipelago.gg, you will be presented with the main website of Archipelago. This serves as kind of the landing place for most of the official resources, with links, with FAQs, and specifically the setup guides for all the officially supported games. They all are hosted on this website. But if you click on setup guides, you will come to this listing of setup guides for not only all the games, but Archipelago itself. And if you click on the top link, you will be presented with the Archipelago setup guide. And within that setup guide is a link to Archipelago's latest release on GitHub, which will bring you here. When these slides were created, Archipelago 0.5.1 was the current one. It is now already newer than that, so you will see a different number, but the steps are the same regardless. You're going to scroll down to the the assets bit of the latest release, and you will select the Archipelago installation which is appropriate for you. Most likely, that is going to be the one that is labeled .exe for Windows. Most people will be running this on Windows. This particular one is a bad example. It had to have a hotfix, and the hotfix was released 2 days after the original release, which, if you're familiar with GitHub, is clearly visible in the screenshot. But you would pick the one that says .exe for Windows. So, back to how Archipelago works, the client side. So you can see in this folder that I'm showing you here, this is the Archipelago folder after you run the installation, after you run the exe that you download off of GitHub. And you can see that it resides in C, program data, Archipelago. This is nearly universally true. This is where Archipelago will install itself and where all the shortcuts redirect you. And this is important because you will be coming back here quite often to this folder to interact with the various bits and pieces of Archipelago. The custom worlds folder, the data folder, the lib folder, the output folder, the players folder, the SNI folder if you play a Super Nintendo game. You will be interacting with all these folders as well as the list of clients that is also in this directory. So get used to coming back to C Program Data Archipelago because you're going to have to interact with all of these items. Archipelago, the server, is, again, could be the Archipelago website itself. It also contains the hosting functions for Archipelago. It also might be a local instance that you run on your computer. Neither of these is inherently wrong or right. Most people would say that the website is easiest for convenience, but you can also host locally if you would rather. To get the list of supported games, which we'll refer to as the official games, you click on supported games and it will bring you to this list. This list is all games that have been developed to a point where there are now published setup guides and resources available on the website for these games. These are games that are considered stable, perfectly stable with no major issues, and are licensed correctly. Their code has been licensed correctly. They've ticked all the boxes. These are the official games of Archipelago. This is by no means all of the games that you can play in Archipelago. These are just the ones that have made it this far. For an example, if you were to pick Doom out of this list, you would see an option for player options, which you click on it, would allow you to give yourself a player name and to select all of these options, which affect the way that your randomized Doom game would play in an Archipelago. At the very bottom, you have two buttons. Generate single player game, which would turn these settings directly into immediately a playable Archipelago multi-world game with this one player in it, or export options so that you can then add these settings to a larger pool of games to have a more diverse multi-world. If you were to click export options, you would be given a YAML file, which is a text markup file that contains all of the options of this UI element presented on the website. This is just a form for creating said YAML file, which looks like this. If you were to open it in a text editor, such as Notepad++, this is the output of that form. It's just creating a text file with a YAML extension. However, if you say, I would like to look at the other games which are available, there is a spreadsheet linked in the Archipelago Discord, which, if you recall, is one of the links on archipelago.gg's website. You can go to their Discord, and in that Discord is this spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet is every game that is in any sort of phase of development that you can play with Archipelago. Most games, once they are added to the sheet, are in a relatively playable state. It is not a certain that they will be playable in a multi-world, but the rule of thumb is that if it's on the sheet, it generally is. People generally don't ask to add things to these sheets until they have reached a playable, mostly stable state. Stable enough that you can succeed more than half the time in playing the game. There is obviously a little bit of risk there, but most of us who played Archipelago for a serious amount of time would agree that just because something is marked alpha does not mean it's not worth playing in early development. Go for it. Absolutely tour the list. But you can see in this list are links to the GitHub and the notes for each of these listings, which is important because this is how you would interact with a non-official Archipelago game. And there are a couple of key things about each Archipelago game. This is how Archipelago is created. Archipelago games are created rather than how each of these specific games are created. So we're going to reference the things that are not unique, that are common to every Archipelago, non-official Archipelago game. And if you remember these things, then you can rinse and repeat them over and over to accomplish the same installation of any non-official Archipelago game. So, if you pick something off this list, you will be inevitably linked to GitHub, more than likely, to find the files which will allow you to run that particular game. For example, this is Wario Land 4. And in Wario Land 4 is the latest version. And at the bottom, just like what we did before when we scrolled down to install Archipelago, there are 2 files listed here. One is a YAML file, just like the one that we downloaded from Archipelago's website when we went to create a Doom player file. This is that exact same file for Wario Land in its default unpopulated state. So instead of having the UI to use on the website, you would have to open this file in a text editor, and you would have to fill it out by hand. The second is the file for Archipelago called an AP World file. The AP World file tells Archipelago how to generate, interact with, and otherwise connect to said game. So, in Wario Land 4's case, this will be how to interact with Wario Land 4, probably in BizHawk, because that BizHawk is the general purpose emulator of Archipelago, how to connect to it, and how to generate a randomized 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 ROM for Wario Land, given the input of a verified good Wario Land 4 ROM. This, again, is universal to any game. Any game of Archipelago will have at least an AP World file, because that is how Archipelago talks to that game, and probably an example YAML file. If it does not have an example YAML file, it is not the end of the world, and we'll explain. So, you take the AP World file off of GitHub. What do I do with it? You can double-click it, and sometimes that will install. However, I'm going to tell you about the way that is foolproof. And the way that is foolproof is to drag and drop that AP World file into the Custom Worlds folder, which I mentioned before, of Archipelago. If you drag and drop that AP World file into the Custom Worlds folder, you're done. The AP World is installed. However, there's a couple more steps that you can take after that. You can also get to the template, which I mentioned before. If you open Archipelago Launcher, after having dragged and dropped the AP World file into the folder, you can double-click on Archipelago Launcher, and you can click on Generate Template options. And what that will do for you, it will open the Players folder, and inside the Players folder, it will open the Templates folder. And inside the Templates folder is every default YAML for every game that you have a world file for, both official and custom, or unofficial. And in this case, it will have the Wario Land 4 template YAML file in this folder. Once you have all of the YAML files for your particular multi-world, I mentioned that you don't necessarily have to use the server of Archipelago's website. You can run your own. If you were to do that, you could generate locally. And in fact, generating locally is usually what you have to do whenever you are running an unofficial Archipelago game. And the reason is that Archipelago only hosts the AP World files of the official games. So, if you are using an AP World from an unofficial game, you will be forced to generate locally. And this is how you would do that. You would have to have the AP World file for every custom game that you are installing. So, if you and your friends all have custom games that you're trying, you will need all of their AP World files as well. So you have to assemble them all and put them all in your Custom Worlds folder. I will mention now, as a caveat, there are some games, such as GameCube games that run on Dolphin, that will need additional files beyond the AP World file to run, which will generally go in the lib folder because there will be additional scripts needed to run those games. Absolutely check the setup guides for those games to know if that is the case. And they will generally be linked in the same GitHub repository with the AP World file. You will see more than just the AP World file and the YAML file if it exists. You will see other files that are obviously not regular files. Most games don't have those. That is by far more the exception than the rule. But just be aware of the exception. Once you have all the YAML files for your games, and you have all the AP World files that match those YAML files, once again, you can open Archipelago Launcher and you click on the Generate button. Alternatively, if you would rather not do that, you can just click on archipelago generate.exe in the root folder of your Archipelago installation. Believe it or not, hitting the Generate button just calls this executable anyway. They're the same action. Once you do that, it will launch a command window, and it will attempt to generate the game zip for that multi-world. And the game zip is just basically the randomized sum of all of your games, as well as the assets needed to connect to that randomized multi-world. And when it's done, if it's successful, I will not be going into how to error check failed local generation, but most of those errors are self-explanatory anyway. Once it's done, it will create a zip file in the output folder of your Archipelago installation. And this zip folder is what you need in order to host a Archipelago game. Now, I did say that Archipelago's website cannot generate custom worlds with custom worlds. However, it has no problem hosting a multi-world generated from custom worlds because it's not dependent upon that. And so you can, after generating locally, still upload a zip containing a multi-world which has custom worlds, no problem. In order to do that, you come back to Archipelago's website, click on Start Playing, which will bring you to this window. And at the bottom, you'll see a link for Host a Pre-Generated Game, which is what you just created. If you click on that, it will prompt you to upload a file. If you come back and you upload that zip file, it will create a room for you. And once the room is created, you click on create a seed for you. Once you click on a seed, you create your room and it'll create a lobby. And the lobby will have everyone's game, name, and patch file listed if they needed to download a patch file in order to run their game. But because we've generated locally, there may be a need for you to supply the patch file for some players. In this particular case, one of our players is playing Mega Man 3, and you can see, if I go back one, that Mega Man 3 does not have a patch file to download, and he does have a patch file that he needs, but it's not here on the website, and so you will have to be able to provide it manually. So if we go back to the zip folder that we just uploaded to Archipelago, we open it up, you'll see that inside this folder are all the patch files and the main Archipelago file, which dictates the content and order of the multi-world, which is what Archipelago needed, as well as the spoiler log. But also importantly, you'll see all the patch files. APLTTP is the link to the past patch files, and you'll see we have an APMM3 patch file. You'll have to take this APMM3 file and provide it to your friend in order for them to be able to play their game. On Archipelago's website, of course, are all the links to the game pages, the setup guides, the options page, and an advanced options page if such exists. So be sure to check out the official links for official games, the setup guides in particular, because they will advise you on how to set up emulators, to use connectors if they have them, all of the bits and pieces of the official games. The setup guides are a little bit harder to find for the unofficial games. Sometimes they will be linked on the spreadsheet from the Archipelago Discord. Other times, they will be in the Archipelago Discord server. For most games, there is a thread created under the Future Game Design channel, and inside that channel are all of the threads for those unofficial games. Generally, they are in the pins of those threads. So, be sure to check on the server for the particular thread for your game. That is, of course, the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment under this video. I don't know why you would do that. I don't really need the engagement. Here's a picture of my dogs. And I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope you enjoy playing Archipelago.